All righty. So we're going to go ahead and get started again. Thank you all for coming and joining us for our trash and treasure. This specific trash and treasure is hitting across all levels. So that's federal, state, and local. And then the next trash and treasure that we have will be hitting our community weigh-in. So that is an opportunity for folks to come and kind of weigh in a little bit more on trash and treasure pieces of legislation that are either good or not good for youth and young adults across our nation. My name is Marcella Middleton, and I am the CEO with lived experience of Away Home America. And I'm happy to be here with you all, but I'm also happy that our organization invested in having someone with lived experience at the helm of the organization, and just really supported that shifting and sharing power to youth with lived experience. I live in North Carolina right now. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. Shout out to the Broncos. I moved here when I was about 12 years old, and I've been here ever since. I think I went back a couple of times, but I experienced the foster care system as well as homelessness as a young person as I was navigating getting my degree. I got my degree in social work. Shout out to all the social workers. I did that work for a little while and I couldn't because I was like, oh, I'm going to beat up these parents. I can't do this. So I had to get up out of there. And I started training social workers, and I did that for about 6 years, and I absolutely loved that. And then that brought me here to Away Home America in my role now. That's just a little bit about me, but I would love to get to know you all as we're continuing to do this. And not only just in this event, but all of the events that Away Home America has. I have to shout out our biggest in-person event, which is coming up October 23rd through the 24th in Chicago. And so I just want to invite all of you all there to come and have discussions about us. Our theme is from struggle to strategy. And shout out to our operations coordinator, Des, for putting all of that together and our team in supporting her. So, for those of you that may not be familiar, Away Home America is a national advocacy organization that centers lived experience. But as we're centering lived experience, we offer public policy as a vehicle to drive grassroots campaigns. We're a national organization that seeks to end and prevent youth homelessness by working to change policies at the federal, state, and local level. So we don't do any direct services, even though that's really, really wonderful and necessary work. We don't do direct services like running homeless shelters or doing case management, but we work in policy and we work with policymakers, legislators, and we're seeking policy and administrative changes. And these changes are really to support young people that have been historically marginalized. So, again, welcome to Trash and Treasure. We're grateful to have you all joining us for our third annual Trash and Treasure webinar. I just want to level set a little bit to be clear that we're not mentioning any specific bill numbers. What we are doing is having a high level conversation about legislation and statistics across the country in 2025 that would either be helpful, and if it's helpful, that's what we're calling our treasure. And if it's harmful, we're calling that trash for our youth and young adults experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. Additionally, we have our honorable mentions, and that will include proposals that either have a mix of trash and treasure in the same bill or don't explicitly mention youth and young adults or not at the lowest access point. So if you're having a visceral reaction to our title, Trash and Treasure, I really want to invite you to step out of that visceral space and lead with curiosity and step into a space of partnership with us as we're focusing on preventing and ending youth homelessness. We can't accomplish that goal unless we have an honest conversation about what legislation is working or not. This year, we have extended our time together from 60 minutes to 90 minutes because we wanted to give that opportunity for us to truly engage and have more time to do that. But we also, as I said in the beginning, have a additional webinar, which is going to be hosted next Tuesday, September 9th at the same time. So 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. and just convert it for our CT and Pacific Standard time frames, but it'll be 2 Eastern. And in that webinar, we're going to go deeper into what you all are seeing and feeling at the state and local level, and what could and or will impact youth and young adults. We've noted the difference in subtitles, and today's webinar is Trash and Treasure across all levels. And then Tuesday is our Trash and Treasure community weigh-in. And that's going to be co-moderated by 2 of our wonderful youth policy team members. And those members, our youth policy team members, are with us in every step of the way of our work surrounding our policy, because there's nothing about us without us. One, first and foremost, and then 2, none of our work can truly progress unless we're involving those who have lived experience. And so our youth policy team is that young people with lived experience that help us put together everything here at AWHA America in terms of our policy and our work. And so those 2 policy members that you all will see on September 9th are Jazz and Mercy. So shout out to them. My hope is that we will see you all there so that we can continue this conversation. I really do hope you all come. And also, after you've experienced this one, that you encourage other people to also come as well, because the more the merrier. Um, and so this year, our team utilized key searches for all 5 of our recommendations in our current 119th Congressional Policy Agenda. And that resulted in a total of 25,690 pieces of legislation, um, more than doubled the 11,515 bills from last year. So last year we had only 11,515 bills, and this year we've got 25,690 pieces of legislation. And this number alone really shows us what many of us already have been feeling, that policymakers throughout our country are talking about youth and young adults experiencing homelessness and or youth serving systems. Whether these intended ideas, could are harmful or helpful or somewhere in between, they're still here. And so that's one of the biggest things as it pertains to our organization and why we were here, to really ensure that across this nation there are not only conversations about youth and young adult homelessness and how we can solve it, but actually pairing with young people, partnering with young people to actually make solutions to end that. And we here at Away Home America have a wonderful New Deal policy proposal that gives us those solutions directly from youth and young adults and other experts around the nation. So throughout this process, our research team, led by our very own policy analyst, Karan LaTourette, shout out to him, along with 2 of our YPT members, really whittled down the key trends for each recommendation out of that 25,690 pieces of legislation, and which, our moderator will be talking about today. And again, this really outlines our New Deal. And if you haven't had an opportunity to read our New Deal, please, 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 because you are not confined to this moment to be exposed to the wonderful things that come from Away Home America and other national partners, as we're working to end and prevent youth homelessness. So please, please look up our New Deal to End Youth Homelessness. It's very easy. It's comprehensive, but it's very easy to read and get through. It shows you a pathway to transformation, shows you where we currently are, the reformative efforts, transformative edge of reform efforts, and then transformation. It shows you what that looks like. And so I would love for you all to look at that and share that with folks. Finally, our format today will have a brief question and answer portion after each recommendation. So starting off with recommendation 4 and 5, as they are brand new, and there are brand new 2 recommendations in our 119th Congressional Policy Agenda, and we'll start this year's webinar off here. And with that, I would like to thank everybody again for being here and pass the mic to our wonderful policy director, Josh Kogan, and our host and moderator for part 1 of the webinar series. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Marcella, and welcome again, everybody. This year, we are especially grateful and honored to be joined by a few state legislators from across the country, some of whom represent pilot states in our very own New Deal Transforming the Way Home initiative, specifically my home state of North Carolina and the state where I started in this work at the state and local level, Texas. As mentioned earlier, though we are honored with special guest speakers this year who have direct experience in introducing relevant legislation to our various topics of discussion today. We will not be mentioning specific bill numbers nor participating in any specific legislative calls to action that could be perceived as direct or grassroots lobbying. Rather, we invite you into a space of curious conversation as we look at a broad landscape of happenings across the country that would be helpful or harmful, as Marcella mentioned, in the movement to end and prevent youth homelessness. With that, as I give a quick legislative overview on our fourth policy recommendation where we'll start, I would like to welcome North Carolina State Senator Caleb Tedros from Senate District 41 for our first topic, which is investing in youth and family supportive services with the lowest possible access point or points to qualify. This year, for this recommendation, our treasurer awards go to Oregon, Texas, and North Carolina. Over in Oregon, though ultimately vetoed by the governor, lawmakers sought to upgrade the Foster Children's and Sibling Bill of Rights, giving youth in custody the power to say no to forced religious participation, keep their belongings in real luggage rather than trash bags, and receive legal representation during abuse investigations. Ultimately, this legislation is about dignity and agency. Over in Texas, a rural pilot program sought to bring foster care prevention and adoption support directly to small communities. Furthermore, families with lived experience would have helped guide this process. And in North Carolina, lawmakers sought to expand childcare subsidies, add paid family leave incentives, and boost financial literacy programs. Investing in families early so fewer end up in crisis is absolute treasure. As our research team did not discover any blatant trash or even any honorable mentions for this recommendation, we're going to jump right into our discussion. So, with that, Senator Tedros, first and foremost, thank you for being with us today. And as our time together is short, we'll just dive on in with our first question. So, to kick us off, as a state senator in, again, pardon my bias as someone born and raised in the great state of North Carolina, why is it important to you to develop and expand preventative resources that support holistic family well-being?
Yeah, and thank you for that, Josh, and everyone who put this together. I think it's pretty blatant from my perspective at the need to invest, especially in some of these programs that we have, whether it's North Carolina or across the country. Just well, let's take away some of the moral reasons why we should be investing in these things, because some of those arguments have tended to fail, especially the more that I am a senator. But just even from a financial or well-being perspective from a state, the more that you are investing in programs up front, especially as a child is developing, that is less investments later on that you have to invest in. I mean, if you look at some of the problems that a state like North Carolina and across the nation face, whether it's education later down the line, it's our prison pipeline that we're obviously talking about, even connections to things like economic development or affordable housing. A lot of that stems from those first pivotal years that a child has. And so when you look at the statistics over the circumstance that a child comes from in their childcare, the first 10, 15 years, you can oftentimes take a look at where a child will end up. Now, that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, but it's just logically speaking, the more you try to invest in something like childcare, the more you invest in having holistic care for a child as they're coming up, the more that society can expect a positive return. And I apologize for sort of financializing this, but as you're discussing it with other people that may not share our values, that's sort of the terms that you have to put it in. So I think for me, it is just common sense. I think partially because there is a generational divide that maybe I see a certain perspective than my counterparts that are a lot older than I don't necessarily see. And so we are in different times where a child's upbringing is a lot different right now than it was maybe 40, 50 years ago. And so a lot of these sort of policy perspectives and the things that you and Marcella have been sharing for me have been sort of aligned with my values because I see the importance of it. And maybe some folks don't necessarily see that.
Thank you for sharing that, Senator. And then my second question for you today is, oh, something happened with my Google Doc. There we go. Given the overview highlighted in Oregon, and I know you're not in Oregon, but in your opinion, why do you think there's an overarching hesitancy in our society to give young people in youth serving systems the autonomy to make their own decisions in matters that directly impact them?
Yeah, I think that's what the case. A lot of sort of complex policies. There's no silver bullet to solve anything. There's going to be a downside with whatever policy that you introduce. I think at times policymakers that are maybe a potentially different generation, et cetera, um, at times don't necessarily look at the current circumstance as being the worst case. So if you introduce something new, a new policy, et cetera, one would look at the new policy and say, what if this goes wrong? But in reality, they're not necessarily thinking about what's currently going wrong right now. And so I think from that perspective, there is a general hesitancy, and we can talk about generational divides over, those from a different generation tend to feel that they know what's best for a child. There's just a general recognition to children that they don't have the ability to reason or know what's good for themselves. So maybe that bleeds into their policy perspective, right or wrong. I've seen that has led to wrong decisions at times, and so. Josh, I think that's ultimately what it is. There is a tendency for some folks to use the excuse of nuance to kind of blurry certain morality. This child is not experienced enough. They can't possibly make their decisions because they don't know X, Y, and Z. When in reality, that is sometimes used as an excuse for quote unquote adults not to do the things that we were all brought up to think are right or wrong. And so I think that's been a continuing sort of theme that I've seen from a perspective of, we know what's best for children in all cases. From my perspective, that's something that I've seen in the Senate, and I can see how that logic could be used, whether it's in Oregon or anywhere else.
Thank you for that. And before we move to the Q&A, are there any final thoughts in under a minute that you would like to leave the audience with as it relates to this particular recommendation?
Yeah, I'm extremely inspired by some of the work that you all are doing and to continue to push that policy discussion. I think that is extremely important. I've only been in the Senate for 6 months now, something like that. But it is generally, I am taken aback at how sort of dense some people's understanding of childcare and what's needed is, to be quite frank with you. And I think it makes it that much more important for policy experts and those doing the actual work to reach out to these policy advisors, to reach out to these elected officials, and make sure you're really pushing back on maybe negative thoughts that they have, or just areas that they're just not as informed in. And so I would emphasize that to continue to push because you need to be surprised by how far advocacy can get you.
Thank you for that. And at this time, we will now open up our webinar for questions from the audience. It's a quick 5-minute space. So as it's a very short time frame, we do ask that you keep your questions succinct so that we may get to as many questions as possible. However, please remember to join us on Tuesday to dive deeper. So to start, please feel free to raise your hand and come off mute, or you can put your questions in the chat for Senator Tedros.
I wanted to ask a question. For I know you mentioned that it's good for young people to be advocating. Do you think, like, when young people think about, like, I guess some of the harshness that may come from trying to advocate and, like, educate people around what actually is happening with themselves and other young people, like, I guess what kind of encouragement would you give to them to entice them to want to come in there and feel like, what they say, could be heard?
Yeah, I think part of it is also good to give them a historical perspective. I mean, listen, advancements or pushing policy has never been easy. It's not like, we passed the Voting Rights Act of 65, and then after that, everything was smooth sailing. And so progress is always, you're going to take a couple steps forward. You're going to talk to a policymaker who's not going to listen or maybe even respect your perspective, but that can't be the limit. And part of it is just a reminder that, listen, is oftentimes kids that change the world, but they get the credit when they're older. And so I always tell folks that don't progress is continuous, and oftentimes those who are the most active, who have the most energy, are the ones that are going to push progress. And history has told us that. So I tell folks that you just got to keep your head down and keep pushing.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Senator, for joining us today. And with that, we'll move on to the next recommendation.
Thanks so much.
All right. Jumping over to our fifth recommendation, which is fully supporting education pathways connected to basic human needs for all youth and young adults. Texas State Representative John Busey of House District number 136 was scheduled to be with us today, but unfortunately was not able to make it due to legislative responsibilities. However, with us in his place is his legislative director, Ben Hickman, whom I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage as I give a brief legislative overview. Our Treasure for Rec 5 awards go to Texas and Oregon, with an honorable mention going over to North Carolina. First up, Texas. Lawmakers introduced a bill that would have required every college and university to have a designated liaison officer for students experiencing homelessness. The definition was broad, covering students who have been homeless in the 24 months before enrollment or while enrolled full time. It also extends to youth who were in state conservatorship before turning 18. Though it did not pass this session, this would have finally brought this kind of support K through 12 students have to those pursuing higher education, ensuring youth and young adults have help accessing housing and other resources. Over in Oregon, a proposal here would have expanded tuition waivers to make higher ed far more accessible. The eligibility list included current foster youth, former foster youth, adopted foster youth, and both current and former homeless youth so long as they're under 40 years of age and enrolled in at least one credit hour per semester. That means part-time students would qualify and waivers would last until they've completed the equivalent of 4 years of undergrad. And finally, our honorable mention is North Carolina. Lawmakers looked at expanding in-state tuition to undocumented students who graduated from North Carolina high schools and attended for at least 2 consecutive years. The bill also sought to keep students' application information confidential. It's not treasure since it wouldn't provide wraparound support, but it is still notable for tackling tuition equity and protecting vulnerable students from exposure. And with that, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first question.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, first question for you. Many people here know that public schools have liaisons to support K through 12 students experiencing homelessness. Could you share why it is equally important for colleges and universities to have similar liaisons for students in higher education settings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just generally, the problems that homeless high school students experience don't disappear when they enter college, right? These are problems that might even get worse as they enter this kind of a new environment, right? You can think of these as any potential financial costs related to post-secondary, that's affording food, affording housing, even the instability of housing during school breaks, and then navigating financial aid and scholarship opportunities. All of these problems make it much more difficult to focus on school, adapt to a new environment, succeed in your classes, or succeed in the work that you might have to be doing because you have to afford the school that you're currently engaged in, right? Also, at the same time, most college students lean heavily on family support and existing support networks that they have to navigate these new systems. And students who are homeless often don't have these supports, right? They don't have that home base to fall back on. So trying to navigate these totally unfamiliar systems, um, while they're navigating them, they're probably navigating them alone, most likely. So whatever community supports we can offer them are critical resources. And also, aside, we already offer, at least in Texas, these liaisons to students that were in foster care. There's no reason we can't expand those kind of services um, to students that were experiencing homelessness or might be experiencing homelessness between breaks during college, right? Um, Also, at the same time, a larger percentage of students who are homeless will be first generation in college, right? So don't have that, uh, familial knowledge of what's going to happen when they go to college. What are my professors asking of me? What are the standards? What is academia like? It's a totally new environment for a lot of students. And when it comes to housing in college, it's really inherently unstable. You have these long periods of time that many universities, colleges, any post-secondary won't necessarily allot housing for. You have a winter break, a summer break, and what are students who don't have reliable housing supposed to do during that period, right? And so another part of this idea is, helping to secure stable housing for those students during those times. Yeah, it's really just critical to try and give these students the stability and tools and support that they need to succeed in college and generally hopefully exit homelessness using the skills they get during this period of time.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And from your perspective, building on that, what other barriers are or may be in the way of accessing higher education for youth and young adults with lived expertise of homelessness and or other youth serving systems?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers, right? Getting to higher education of any kind involves a lot of codependent steps. You have to balance all these steps at once, and for students without support networks, that's kind of an impossible ask. But the thing about the tests you have to take, the transcripts you have to request, the letters of recommendation, all the applications, the cost of all of that, right? The financial cost as well as the emotional and time cost. Um, and then again, that understanding of what a good personal statement is, right? Or what a educational pathway is right for any individual in any given circumstance. These are all things that are not necessarily intuitive and not given to everybody, right? And so whatever supports we can offer these people um, are really critical, and those are all barriers, right? Those are all humongous barriers, and not to mention that now, because we've criminalized homelessness in the way that we have, many of these young people are going to be just as impacted as well, right? And that is also going to erect even more barriers in their way when they're trying to get the job they may need to support themselves, to pay for the applications, the job they may need to support themselves, to pay tuition in college, to pay for housing, to pay for food. Um, these are all humongous barriers that we have to address, both individually and through more comprehensive policy change.
Thank you for sharing that. And just kind of open-ended for you, are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave the audience with as it relates to this particular recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, generally when we talk about this recommendation, policy issues on the whole, at least on our end, especially in Texas, the real battle is getting the policy passed, right? We have a lot of ideas that we really care about, but we need to get buy-in on the bill. And one thing that I think is really critical about this specific policy area, this recommendation, is that it is kind of reworking the narrative, right? I think one of the biggest problems that we have faced as legislators in Texas is that there's a certain narrative around what being a person without housing means and what being a person without housing looks like. Um, and that leads people to be less sympathetic to the population. And it's also a complete mischaracterization of the problem as well. Right? When people think about somebody without housing, they think of a single adult, most likely with co-occurring drug abuse and mental health disorders. Right. And there are a whole host of problems with that characterization by itself. But aside from that, part of the work that we have to be doing, not just through conversations, but through the actual policy we introduce, is reworking that narrative and showing these are the kind of people who are all like, or these kind of people are also experiencing homelessness. These kind of people also need our support. The population you're imagining is not the population that is actually having this experience. And I think that's a really critical work that exists, not just in conversations, but in focusing on this kind of policy recommendation and youth policy in general, right? People don't typically have the same consideration of the circumstances that a homeless youth might be in, right? And so trying to make them aware of that situation is really critical. Those are the most successful conversations we had this session. We got this bill out of the Texas House, right? Or sorry, not to refer to a specific bill, but we were able to get momentum around this issue because I think of that narrative work we were doing.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your time, Ben. This time we're going to open up questions from the audience. Again, brief, so feel free to either come off mute, raise your hand, and come off mute, or put your question in the chat. And as Marcella mentioned in the chat, your questions don't have to be perfect. This is the space to ask.
Hey, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hey, Benjamin, thank you so much. My name is Dewey Marshall with Texas Network of Youth Services. I wanted to thank you to your boss for working with us in Appleseed on the homelessness liaison issue. I was proud to be invited testimony. I have personal lived experience as well at Texas Women's with the liaison. And I got to work with your staff. So without getting into bill specifics, what do you think is the best way to get that narrative and get buy-in on the Senate side behind this issue?
That is a great question. I really appreciate all your help on this bill. Yeah, Texas Appleseed and Texas Network of Youth Service, y'all are so critical in all this work we're doing. I mean, I really appreciate y'all so much. In terms of getting buy-in on this issue, I mean, I think the larger, I don't have a perfect answer, right? It's something we're looking at a lot this interim, is trying to have conversations on one hand with the people who do a lot of the scorecard work. I don't know if y'all are familiar with like the scorecard issue, but generally people will have like, this is my Republican or Democratic scorecard, and depending on how you vote on various issues, that scorecard will be ranked higher or lower, like on an A through F grade scale. And that influences a lot of people's decisions, even if they are not sure what the bill actually does. And we had multiple Republican colleagues come up to Representative Busey and say on this policy issue in particular, on the first time it was read on the House floor, there were like there was a no vote recommendation from the scorecard. However, I have looked at this myself, and I'm actually realizing now this is a great bill, right? And so I think that there's work to be done there. And then in the Texas Senate specifically, that there's for people that aren't in Texas, there's really one person who controls the Texas Senate. And so it kind of all goes through that office. And I would say we will hopefully work with that office in the interim.
Thank you so much. And thanks y'all at Away Home America for hosting this as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us. Are there any other questions for this recommendation?
Not a question, but I did just want to show my appreciation for this as somebody who was experiencing homelessness while I was trying to get my education. Having someone that you can talk to is definitely important. And I know like the liaison piece is a little different like in Texas than in North Carolina, but we had like something similar based on who was funding our stuff. And so this is the stuff that really makes a difference. Because a lot of times, a lot of us don't have family support to say, hey, you got this, or like, what's going on with you? Can you, let me work you through some stuff because I've been here and done that. And even if you do have family support, they may have not went to college, so they don't really know how to, kind of work you through that. So this is really awesome to really be able to support young adults as they're trying to pursue our higher education. And I think the biggest thing in our country a lot of times is people don't see the necessary investments that we have to make for our young people so that they don't end up in older adult homelessness. Like everything that we're doing right now to support our young people is to mitigate older adult homelessness. And so if we don't invest in these things now, then we'll continue to have older adult homelessness, and people will continue to get upset. but they're contributing to the problem because they don't want to support young people when they are trying to get what they need. And so I just wanted to give a shout out and say I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. Appreciate you sharing your lived experience. And also, like Senator Theodore said, not to, there's obviously a huge human component to this, and this is critical in a humanitarian sense, but not to financialize it, but also at the same time, what you're talking about, like the getting people as early as you can before they start experiencing adult homelessness, there's real financial incentive there too. And when other arguments fail, that's a great argument to fall back on as well.
Absolutely. I see Katie has a question.
Yeah, and I'm happy to come off mute and say it, but I realized it's a little more of a general question. I actually kind of occurred to me a little bit after the previous senator was talking, but I'm kind of curious what the lawmakers think about using pilot programs as like a way to get things passed more quickly, especially like to the point of, a lot of lawmakers are like status quo is good. So anything new is, a harder push. But I tend to worry about like the unintended consequences of introducing some of these things that we really need more permanently as pilot programs. So I would be curious, really, if anyone has thoughts about that.
I don't know if I have more time, Josh. I'm happy to cede the question to the next speaker, but I'm also happy to speak to it for a second.
Yeah, feel free to share your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll get some more answers to this as well, but I would say there is kind of a pilot program purgatory that happens, right, where things go into pilot programs and then are never heard from again. And I do think part of that is like re-engagement on an issue, right? Like once a pilot program starts, the engagement falls off a little bit from the advocacy side and also from the policymaker side. You're putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot, right? So it covers up the problem for a second, and maybe that is helpful to understand some of the mechanisms by which this could be fixed. But I think you have to some extent, maybe this isn't a great answer, but you have to evaluate it on a case-to-case basis. Some situations I found it very helpful and I've seen it be very helpful. In other situations, it's clearly somebody trying to kick the can further down the road.
Thank you. That is
Thanks for
helpful,
sharing
and that
that,
was sort
Ben.
of how I was thinking.
Perfect. We'll get the weigh in as well from our next two speakers here in a few moments, Katie. And thank you again, Ben. With that, we'll move on to our next recommendation. So recommendation number 3 for us is ending the use of police in all forms of punishment, retribution, and carceral control in homeless services, education, and child welfare settings, and invest in and implement safety mechanisms that are designed and defined by members of the community. And with that, I'd like to welcome Senator Wilson from Washington State's 30th Senate District to the virtual stage as I give a brief legislative overview. Our Rec 3 Treasure Awards this year go to Washington State and Hawaii, with Texas in the trash, and Mississippi receiving an honorable mention. First up, Washington. Lawmakers here introduced a bill focused on youth in and exiting detention. Instead of focusing solely on punitive measures, this would have pushed for supportive services, requiring a full multidisciplinary family assessment before courts could even file certain petitions. Ultimately, this would have aimed to break the homelessness to prison pipeline, helping youth reunify with families or build a safe plan if no stable adult was available upon their release. Over in Hawaii, a proposal would have created individualized support teams for at-risk and court-involved youth, emphasizing culturally responsive, community-based programs. What made this stand out for our team was its focus on Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander youth, ensuring support came from the community itself and not just the justice system. Now, our trash award here goes to Texas as lawmakers doubled down on policing schools by expanding who counts as a peace officer. Under the new law, now in effect, even reserve officers without a permanent license can serve in schools if certain training boxes are checked. Why trash, you ask? Simply because it entrenches policing and education instead of exploring alternatives to keeping students safe. And finally, our honorable mention goes to Mississippi. The idea our research team discovered here would have required schools to adopt conflict resolution and peer mediation programs. This is a real step toward alternatives to suspension, but it also leaned on more school resource officers and even fined parents and guardians up to $250 if they miss discipline conferences. So a mixed bag, promising on peer-led conflict resolution, but still tied to punitive enforcement. And with that, Senator Wilson, thank you so much for joining us today. As our time's short together, let's dive on in. All right.
You ready for me?
Senator,
Are you okay? There you go. You got a question for me, I know.
I do have a question for you. So could you speak a little more about the need for legislators all across the country to address the continuous cycle of the homelessness and prison pipeline, specifically from a youth and young adult perspective? And feel free to share a concrete example of how this could be addressed in your opinion.
I am absolutely so excited to be here, and I see Delegate McCaskill right underneath me on the screen, so I'm psyched she's here as well. I'm just going to start off by saying that I'm an old lady in the room here, and I also identify and I walk with privilege, and I can make a choice when I walk in a room to disclose or not. And so many people in this space and in every space don't have that choice. And so my job is not to be a voice for others, but to create the space. So if you know me a little bit as a disruptor, and I've been known as a radical in my time. But I do it all for the right reason. And I think the other thing you need to know is that I do believe our systems were never created to get people out of them. They were created to keep people right where they are, and they're doing a pretty good job. So, we've created the institutions where people have to do the wrong thing to get what they need to do it right. And if we had equity from the very beginning and access to resource and generational wealth, I don't think we would be in the space that we're in. So that's kind of what brings me to the work. And I started working with 11 to 21-year-old pregnant and parenting teens, and realized that an 11-year-old being a parent, that was way too late. And if I actually wanted to make a difference, early learning was the space. So that's always been my focus in community. But in the Senate, I've spent my time and my years trying to unravel what happens and what the intersections are and what the threads are between child welfare, foster care, between youth homelessness and justice involved youth. And so voice is critically important. So I also will say in our state, we have a nothing about us without us bill for the state of Washington. So nothing is done in committee or in a work or task force without having those with lived experience, not only at the table, but compensated for the value that they bring. And I think that's also how it is that you move policy that actually makes positive changes and impacts, because people themselves know what they need. They just need to have room at the table to tell us that. I also believe there's a lot of issues when we're talking about this that are related to intersectionality, especially as we think about our Black and Brown communities, as we think about the intersection between our LGBTQ and our trans youth. I think all of those things, we have systems that were never put in place to create safe spaces. And so individuals end up homeless. And when you're homeless without, you do what you need to do to get what it is that you need to survive. And that often is the way that an individual either ends up in the child welfare system, or if they're older, ends up in the juvenile justice system. So, and that leads to chronic homelessness. It leads to SUD and MAUD issues. It leads to all kinds of things, trafficking and everything else. And so I focused everything that I can in my legislation on front end solutions that provide support for families, things like direct cash assistance, because who am I to tell you how to spend your money? And if you have it, you know what you need. Those kinds of things are ground and bound in research, and we need to be listening to that and doing that. I also have done a lot of work trying to create safe spaces for emerging adults, so as they age out of the care of our state, that we would do what any parent would do, and that's make sure we launch young people with what they need to be successful, whether that's employment, whether that's housing, whether that is transportation, whether that is access to education, whatever that might be, that we don't push young people out at 18 and push them into homelessness, which is what I found that we were doing. And the same thing in working in our juvenile justice space, really thinking about what it takes when young people leave those systems to re-enter a community and be part of that community, but also, again, get what they need. And so a lot of work in the 1115 waiver space, which is the federal dollars, the federal waiver that allows us to do things like provide young people with access and to services pre-release so that when they release into community, they already have what they need. And we've been doing that work in the adult space as well, whether that is healthcare, whether that's housing, whether that's employment, whatever that might be. Those things need to be set in space and set in place in a bridged, facilitated way when a young person releases, so they don't go right back in to the same system that put them there because they don't have what they need. And we know that first 72 hours is critical for young people as well as for adults coming out of the system. I also think the other important thing I mentioned was generational wealth. And so working on the supplemental security income benefits that we've been using to raise children that should be kept in trust for them. So when they age out of our system, they have that money that they deserve and that they need in order to launch themselves into adulthood. And so that's another piece of work that I've been working on. And really anything that we can do to launch young people wherever they may be in that space and also support families. And that is always my goal. You know, whether it is biological family, whether it's chosen family, whether it is significant adults in a young person's life, first and foremost a choice. But the belief that everybody has that is just not true. And so we really need to take those things into account and make sure that we have the spaces and the places that are safe for young people to be. And that really decreases justice involvement. It also decreases recidivism, which is what we're trying to do. And I think the only other thing I'm going to say, and what makes this body of work so difficult, is that all of this is discretionary funding. None of this is entitlement. And so every time we have a budget issue in our state or federally, food, shelter, clothing, child welfare, juvenile justice, early learning, corrections, all of those things are the first spaces and places that get cut. And the group that is deserved and needs it the most. And I will stop there because you could get me going forever. But incredibly important work, and it's where my head and my heart is. And Youth Voice has the answers. We just need to listen.
Thank you so much for that, Senator Wilson. And you covered pretty much everything related to all the questions that I had. So we'll at this time we'll open it up for questions from the audience, unless you have some closing thoughts before we do that.
You know, I did want to say about the intent, the legislation question beforehand, or, you know, what you find is you have staff in our legislatures that are there for years and years and are brilliant. And then you have people like myself and Delegate McCaskill who may come and go. And I've been there, I'll be starting my 8th year, so the end of my 2nd term. But oftentimes a piece of legislation is words on paper. And what I pride myself in as a systems thinker is calling things back and asking about what the impact was versus what the intent is, and also where things are in the implementation to make sure that if we need to do mid-course correction or we need to do something differently, we can do that. And I also think it's also important to think about pilots or a launch, and they should be collecting data. And if they work, that's what gets into statute. If they don't work, then we need to think about maybe there's another place that we put our money, because the people don't people need it, and we need to think about how we get it out to the folks that need it. So I am known, and I'll go back. I have something right now. It's HSYNC, so Housing Stability for Youth in the Court program. That is, last session, we'll go back this next session to make it statewide and permanent in statute because it is working. And so it's a model that works. And so now it's worthy of saying we need to do this for all, not any longer just a certain sliver of young people.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your advocacy, Senator. At this time, we'll open up questions. Again, feel free to raise your hand and come off mute or drop them in the chat.
You cannot be that shy, y'all. Is there anything we need to do better, different? Can I ask that, Josh?
Of course. So, is there anyone who would like to respond to that question here?
I guess I just wanted to like say too, there's so much division, like as we're looking at, our current government. And with that division, I guess, is there any like comments that you would give to help folks help us feel a little bit better about that division, and maybe like some of the work on top of like what you shared that you're doing to like navigate that division in such difficult, you know what I mean? Like people who
Yeah.
think like all the way at the other end of the spectrum.
I can walk in a room and have that conversation because I don't look like really who I am, but who I am is who I am. And I have been that way for a long, long time. But what I would say is your stories matter so much. I could care less about the bill number. I could care less about that. Words on paper are words on paper, but the minute you tell a story, it never will be the same for somebody. And I don't care who you are, an RRD or whatever. Stories matter. Your stories matter. And then the other thing is there are always places where we agree. So don't start where you're diametrically opposed, right? If you can come to the center and find a place of agreement, and I always say, okay, then look around and say who's not at the table that needs to be there, and invite those folks in, and then start from where where you agree, and then have people share their understanding and what their experience is. But your stories are what matters. And if you have we do virtual testimony and have never left that since the pandemic. Your 60 seconds, your 90 seconds can change somebody's belief around humanity, if you will, and it is so much more impactful than just words on paper.
Thank you for that, Senator Wilson.
Thank you. And Vivian, I saw your hand. Did you still have a question?
Yes. Senator Wilson, what role, if any, do you see the state education agency or other state agencies playing in supporting, reducing recidivism for youth experiencing homelessness and incarceration systems?
Oh, you
What
got
more
me started.
information could we provide?
Well, I don't think it's info, to tell you the real truth. I think it's money. We cut every youth program. I think you do live in my state. We had a budget crisis, and all of our nonprofits and CBOs that actually provide prevention or provide youth development, provide youth leadership, do diversion, all of those programs got cut. We also cut our truancy programs in our court systems. And kids are still going to not go to school. Schools still have to report them, but to whom? So, part of this is around, there is this idea about what are kids going to do if we give them nothing to do. They're going to get in trouble. They're going to get in trouble. And we have before and after school programs, but not for everybody. We don't have, and if you don't have, if you're in the child welfare system, we provide supports for your basic needs, but Who allows you to play sports and who allows you to get involved in music and who allows you to be part of other kinds of activities, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, FHA, whatever it might be, hip hop, all of those things. Our state does nothing to do that. We also have a role in institutional land, and we're not doing any of our young people justice in any of our detention facilities. And that's been a body of work for 3 sessions. Those young people are coming out and they should be in better shape. So, part of it is revenue, but part of it is also the belief in the importance of humanity. And what I say on the floor all the time is humans cost money, lots and lots of money. And there's not one human that is not worthy of that investment. And this is not my checkbook. This is our checkbook. And everyone, deserves a line item on that checkbook, including you. And so, and I will continue to say that. And we also have to be willing to then find the revenue to pay for those things as well. And that's also a whole nother conversation. Vivian, let's chat.
Let's do. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we have one more question briefly that we'll touch on that Evelyn, one of our youth policy team members, has for you in the chat. They said, you've mentioned systems thinking. How do we move from relying on discretionary funding toward more sustainable and systemic support for essential social and public needs like the ones we've discussed today?
Well, if we could chat all together, I would love to. Because that's the biggest issue. And for me, it's within my own state. We don't have an income tax. Our biggest funding sources are sales, B&O tax, sales tax, and gas. And those are all living wage job things that people buy. And we have an upside down tax system. So, part of it is that. And again, part of it is thinking about the return on investment on prevention and how much it's going to be cheaper if we do it early on than if we wait. And we will always have to have some dollars to support kids and families. But if we invest in early care and education and support for families, we would not be in the situation we're in where we're paying so much in the juvenile justice space and also the correction space.
Well, thank you so much. It sounds like this is just a start of many conversations with folks on this call with you, Senator. So thank you so much for being with us. And we will move to the next recommendation. And with that, recommendation number 2 from our 119th Congressional Policy Agenda is actualizing reparations for Black and Indigenous Americans that include land and home ownership. As I give a legislative overview at a glance, I would like to welcome Delegate Alethea McCaskill from Maryland House of Delegates District 44B. This recommendation's treasure goes to both Maryland and Massachusetts, with the small caveat that we would always love to see an intentional focus on lived experts at the table and being compensated for their experience in the development and design of any relative program. And the neighboring states of Texas and Oklahoma, though, receive our trash for this recommendation. Over in Maryland, lawmakers attempted to set up a reparations committee to study slavery's history and recommend remedies, such as tax rebates, tuition waivers, and debt forgiveness. Ultimately vetoed by the governor, this would have been a huge step towards serious progress in actualizing reparations. Going up to Massachusetts, introduced legislation here would have required diverse membership of the proposed commission while compensating non-legislative members for their labor. The proposal also centered oral histories and community knowledge, providing one of the strongest frameworks our research team discovered. Moving west, Texas and Oklahoma pushed bills that would have banned diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, going so far as to even forbid teaching about systemic racism, privilege, or reparations in institutions of higher education. Furthermore, if schools broke these proposed rules, they would lose state funding, making the case that these efforts surely belong in the trash. And with that, jumping right into our discussion, thank you so much for being with us today, Delegate.
It is my absolute pleasure. So, Josh, am I like the benediction? Am I the I because I got on a little few minutes late, so I don't know where we are with recommendations.
You are our penultimate recommendation. So
Okay, great. So, good afternoon, family. Um, as Josh has already said, I am Delegate Alethea McCaskill, and I wanted to just mention, I think it was Marcella who said, and Claire, it is always a joy to see you. But mentioning about the impactfulness of, before we even get started with my question, the impactfulness of storytelling. And so I think it's Maya Angelou who says it's not always what you say, and it's not always what you do, but people will remember how you made them feel. And I must say, in the few years that I've been in legislation, it has been those very impactful stories that folks have shared, whether doing testimony or folks have shared with me intimately in my office, that has either that the ones that have brought me to my knees and to tears are the ones that motivated me and pushed me to realize that maybe there needs to be some language change. There may need to be some policy pushing. And so I just want to just continue to encourage you all to tell your stories, and thank you all for sharing. Thank you for having me on this platform as well.
of course, thank you for being with us. And my first question for you, there seems to be still a lot of opposition to actualizing reparations here in 2025. Could you speak a little more about that from your perspective, maybe even highlighting any opposition you may have seen within your own state?
So let's just be clear, and let's be totally transparent, and listen, is make it a little uncomfortable for some. But folks who know me know that I am transparent. And sometimes I have to make folks a little uncomfortable to get folks to do the things that need to be done. And so here in 2025, we have an administration who not just want to roll back the times, literally want to magically erase history. And so we have to make sure we continue the resistance as we are doing so well, including this platform, right? Folks have to continuously talk and speak it out their mouth, the truth. And so we have to do our due diligence in what we're doing, and we just can't stop. And so sometimes you wonder how to attack that mountain. So having reparations universally here in the United States is a mountain that many of us want to see, want to climb and reach the top. But how do you attack this mountain? You just have to chip away at it piece by piece. Here in Maryland, we actually, for the first time in many years, actually got the legislation through both houses. And so I am I was feeling elated when all this happened. The unfortunate thing is it was also vetoed. And so we have to look at administration. We have to look at who we are putting in office. And sometimes it's not just, you need to make sure that folks are of certain color or of certain sex. You need to make sure that you have folks that you are putting in office who actually understands the issue. And so here in our own state, I will say, despite what many have heard or even seen in social media, we're not, as legislators, not getting a lot of opposition about reparations, which is why we actually thought we were good and ready to start the commission. Here in Maryland, we've already studied time and time again around slavery and the impact it has had here in Maryland alone, if we just look at Maryland. And so it's not whether we should study slavery and the impacts of it. What this commission, of course, to do, and we will do, because we will override it next session. We have the numbers to do it. Leadership is ready, and this will be something that leadership is intending to carry through. And so what we have to do here in Maryland is continue to tell the stories. I think some of the opposition is not so much as whether we should have reparations. It is who the reparations should be for, and it has been said what the reparations should be, which is exactly why we should have the study, right? We cannot literally complete baking the cake if we don't have all the ingredients, if you will. And so the opposition here has not been so much as if there should be reparations. It is what the reparations should be and who it should be for. And so we need to continue the further examination, which would be the study. We need to know that for those, listen, speaking on reparations here in Maryland has been an educational moment and enlightening for many folks. It has been folks who says that this has happened so many years ago. Why would you all now in 2025 bring it up? And so the educational moment is trying to help folks connect the dots of how the past is impacting our now. And so we are not experiencing as much opposition as we thought we would have here. As a matter of fact, I was the subcommittee chair to craft this piece of legislation. One of the things I made sure that my committee did was go speak to the folks who in the past have gave strong opposition. And we wanted to have the conversation with them to, one, understand, do they know what reparations are? And for some folks, it's uncomfortable to say the word. And so for folks, we had to meet them where we are and say maybe repair, right? And so we met folks where they were. There was an educational movement, if you will, last session and during the interim last year to get many folks on board. And so this is why also it was such a shock that this bill had been vetoed.
Thank you for sharing that background and a little more context for our audience today. And on the other side of this coin, our research team found a lot of statewide efforts to police conversations and education around DEI topics, including the history and need for actualizing reparations here in the U.S. Could you speak a bit on the importance of naming and challenging tactics such as these that are rooted in white supremacy and white dominant culture?
Yeah, I go back to what I said in the beginning. Listen, we look at our current administration in Washington, D.C., and in many of our states, right? We have literally freedom caucuses here in Maryland as well. There's an educational piece that is missing. And there's an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had. So some folks believe that DEI is something new. This is a new concept that people of color, made up so that they can get one over on them. And actually, DEI, if we want to go, really think back, some folks may say that, DEI started in the 1960s, right? With the Civil Rights Act. We may want to go back even further and think about Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a part of the UN Commission on Human Rights back in 1948. And so DEI is not a new concept. So the education of DEI is missing. We also have to, understand that DEI is about people, not necessarily policy. It's about human rights. It's about inclusion. It's not about just having folks of color, right? Or folks who are indigenous ethnicity. It's not just about that. It's about creating a space in workplaces where folks can feel included because they are included. And so, for me, as an early elementary educator, and folks who may not know my story, I started off in IT many years ago when I graduated with my first degree and worked for Hopkins Medicine. And I programmed for the state of Maryland with their state government. And then I just had my first child and I realized that childcare was a missing integral part here in Maryland. There was something missing, and it was called quality. And then I had my second child and realized 4 years later, we were still having a crisis in childcare. So you know what I did? I opened up my own daycare. I went back to school, got my degree in early elementary education. Folks said, Alethea, you're absolutely crazy because you're going to miss out on all this money to go help children. And I had to. And I say this because we got to start at kids, because we are teaching these prejudices in these children as they grow. So everything we've talked about this afternoon, including homelessness, starts in conversations in the prejudice that we push in our children. And so I decided it would be a great idea that I stay with the little ones. You know, I'm a teacher of little humans. And we are very impressionable on these humans. And we got to catch them where we can and teach them and rear them correctly, right? Whatever the correct way is. And when we do that, we help with maybe possibly not catching them before recidivism, maybe giving them the opportunity of homelessness, because we need to really, really do things like educate and be inclusive. And so for me, I started in early childcare. I think that's where, you know, folks don't necessarily get it. And then there are many folks on here that absolutely get it. But we have to start young. We have to have the uncomfortable conversations. We cannot erase history. History is history, and it's there. I don't care where you try to put it in the museum. It still exists. And so for folks who are uncomfortable, we on the other side need to figure out where we can. Some folks were never pleasing, but where we can have that happy median and that conversation around diversity and equity and inclusion. I just think folks think that this is something new and it came out of Black Lives Matter, right? And that is making folks uncomfortable. But this is why we have to keep history in the books. Real history, all history in the books, in the museums, because people have to know the truth so that folks can just simply understand. Listen, one of the reasons why I got on here a little bit later this afternoon, and I do apologize, I was sitting with the school board and the superintendent this morning of Baltimore County Public Schools, and we spoke about, the main topic we spoke about was absenteeism, right? And the importance of attendance. And we have to catch these families where we can, so we can avoid some of these things and some of these ignorances and figure out why they are absent in elementary school. Why are these kids absent in elementary school? Well, most of the time it's the adult's decision, but then we got to figure out why is it the adult's decision. So holistically, we need to start from the ground up. We have to include education, and so that the conversation of DEI is just not so uncomfortable. Listen, we have had executive orders for affirmative action. Like, it doesn't just go back to DEI just starting now. People need to understand that DEI matters and why it matters. And we have to have that very uncomfortable conversation, that it didn't just start out of Black Lives Matter, that it goes way back. And that if we even want to meet some folks where they are, to not think that it's just like it became a Black thing. We need to teach them that it's human. It's a human right for folks to have fairness and decency. And so there's a whole educational piece that needs to happen around DEI, and just starting it with, it just came out of nowhere. It didn't. But we have to start our children young. We have to be careful, and because we are impressionable, and we have to give our children opportunities so that they can hopefully have the opportunity to avoid, chronic homelessness and what leads to chronic homelessness. And there's some correlation, right, between attendance in school and homelessness. And so it's a whole nother platform to speak on. But I think the ignorance of what DEI is and the confusion that it has cost us is really sending us down a spiral hole because we're not willing to have that conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing, Delegate. And we have time for a question from the audience. And y'all, please remember that we do have the community weigh in on Tuesday. So we will go in deeper in how we're seeing trickle-down effects in our state and local communities. So at this time, please feel free to come off mute or drop a question in chat. I see Mercy. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
I sure can. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I was saying I really like that you mentioned that a piece that's missing from the reparations conversation and DEI as well is just education and awareness around the topic. I personally feel that it's by design. But what are some ways that we can work on this when it comes to educating adults or just the common person about issues that can be uncomfortable to talk about?
Well, listen, thank you so much for asking that. Adults, we are something special. The unfortunate thing is we don't have critical history and real Black history and other history taught in our schools. And a lot of times it's not until you get to the collegiate level that you go and you may choose to go and have one of these diversity courses taught to you. And then that's where your parents don't necessarily can't tell you what classes you can take, or some folks, parents who are paying their tuition say, I can't believe you're taking such a class that's teaching Black history. But that's when you steal that moment away and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, cousin, hey, grandma, you know what I learned? And it's going to be the small corner conversations, the small table conversations that we're going to have to have. We're going to have folks who are willing to speak up. We're going to have folks who are willing to do the homework and the research of what the truth really, really is, right? And so it's going to be those, on a smaller scale, it will be the small conversations that you're going to have. It's going to be shock and awe for some. But then we also need to make sure that these, in our text, that we teach it, right? We got to teach it, and we have to teach it early. And then we have to train. We have to train those educators around DEIs. We have to train educators around the uncomfortable moments and how to remove their bias, if you will, and retrain educators who haven't had the moment of Black history or Indigenous history or women's history, right? We have to retrain the educator. And that educator could be your parents, could be your grandparents, or etc. And so it's the small conversations, but institutionally, we have to teach these things. And then we have to just do exactly what Away Home is doing right now. Continuously create and have these platforms and podcasts, and don't stop. You have to keep advocating. You gotta not, you gotta resist the ignorance. And then you just have to, and like I said, you have those small and those big conversations, but we definitely have to have it institutionally.
Thank you so much for everything that you shared, Delegate McCaskill, and thank you for your time with us today. And with that, we'll move to our last recommendation.
Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. Our last topic of discussion today is surrounding recommendation number 1, which is the investment in BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities. And as I give a brief overview of the legislative landscape here, I would like to welcome Away Home America's very own policy analyst, Karan LaTourette. Our last recommendation has an award for trash, for treasure, and an honorable mention as we look again to Texas and now introduce Florida and California into the mix. Texas takes the treasure here as lawmakers tried to expand the Lone Star Workforce of the Future Fund grant so that small rural minority serving institutions, specifically schools with under 10,000 students and counties under 35,000, could qualify. This would have meant real resources for marginalized communities that are often left out of similar opportunities. Florida gets our trash, as a related bill here would have defined DEI so broadly it basically outlawed any mention of race, gender identity, oppression, and even unconscious bias. It would ban funding for DEI offices in public universities and give people the power to sue if money was spent anyway. Lastly, California earns an honorable mention. California is our third pilot state in the New Deal Transforming the Way Home initiative. A bill here would have created a grant program for BIPOC-led nonprofits in communities most impacted by systemic racism. This is an important recognition, but the funding was temporary. No permanent infrastructure, no systemic fix. While the intent is strong, the design limits long-term impact. So, Texas aimed to expand opportunity, Florida tried to erase it, and California landed somewhere in between. And as we near the end of our webinar today, but before we dive into our last Q&A portion, we'll jump right into the discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today on the virtual stage, Karan.
Thank you. I just want to highlight, since we have some Washington people, that I am a Greener graduate from 2024. So we let it hang loose, as our school motto is.
I love that. So, for you, in light of the broad legislative overview that I gave from various states, as well as from your team's research, because you led the team for the research, and I can't say that enough and thank you enough. It was mentioned at the top of the call, but you really dug into the weeds here. Are there any key takeaways that you would like to share with the audience as it relates to this recommendation?
Oh, okay. I've been thinking about this a little bit as we keep going on, and like a lot of our speakers kind of hit a lot of the notes too, which thank you so much for everyone that was our speakers today. Like amazing. I love you all. But really for me, it that was really hitting was the DEI portion, especially with Rec 1 and Rec 2. Because they are like similar in the sense of like they want to like take away the idea that like DEI gives people who have been marginalized historically and systemically like the privileges that we think we have, and we're trying to like remove the issues that are keeping us from like accessing the system that's already made for us. And like right now we're seeing it like attacking like public universities, and like obviously this is the snowball before like the avalanche of what will come. And like I will put like an asterisk that this isn't like new legislation. Like we saw this last year as well. So like one thing I wish that I had an opportunity to do when I was doing the research for this and like working with our YPT was really seeing what was reintroduced um and what is actually new coming from these states, because like I think that right now we're kind of seeing some places coming out like out of the bushes going like, well, I guess now it's our time to like attack DEI or attack communities who are marginalized.
Thank you for that. And are there any other final thoughts, just broadly speaking, from the whole of the webinar, from the whole of your research that you would like to share with the audience today before we go into the final Q&A?
Yeah. So one thing that I do want to say, and we've talked about this, Josh, and like our staff has, but really we need to be vigilant of what is coming out that's coming out from like legislation, especially when it comes to like our communities that we're in, and like creating like actual strategies to navigate um just these attacks essentially, that like destroys the knowledge and reasoning behind DEI, and just like also like services that are like needed for like youth and young adults to like um leave homelessness essentially. And like we can go further into that in the weigh-in, just plugging that in. Like Tuesday, we'll really be talking about the strategies that we need to come with together as a community.
Thanks for the plug for Tuesday's community weigh-in. If you all are able to stay for a few more minutes, we will open this up for one quick question before we turn it over for closing remarks.
I just want to say, Senator Claire Wilson, I am no longer residing in Washington State. I'm in DC. But I was part of the Y4Y board, and I was also working closely with local organizations in the Olympia and Thurston County area.
Thank you. What a great representation for the other Washington, our Washington state.
No problem. Love it. Miss it there. Miss the weather sometimes. It's raining right now, so.
Oh no. I can't see outside from my little nook.
It's for me.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, we will turn it over at this time to Aurora Higgs, our wonderful Associate Director of Communications and our tech support for today's webinar. Aurora, welcome to the virtual stage.
Josh, thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here with you all. And Karan, thank you so much for your contribution just now. I just wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of Away Home America's team members for an amazing webinar, and a huge thank you to all of our speakers, our CEO, Marcella Middleton, Senator Tedros Ben Hickman from Representative Busey's office, and Senator Wilson and Delegate McCaskill, as well as our very own Karan LaTourette. And I would be remiss if I didn't include our amazing moderator, Josh Kogan, who's really worked behind the scenes to make all of this possible. So thank you to everyone who spoke here today. We couldn't have done it without you. As Away Home America works toward increasing and implementing our policy footprint at both the federal and state and local levels, we need you. Here are just a few ways, maybe just a couple of ways that you can engage with us as we transform systems through public policy to end homelessness for Black, Indigenous, youth of color, and LGBTQIA+ youth on a path to housing justice for all. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and do our little plug here. We'd like to make sure you all advocates, community members, and leaders, direct service providers, and youth and young adults with lived expertise join us on Tuesday, September the 9th, as we continue our discussion. What stood out to you today? We want you to take a moment and process everything that you heard, and what trickle-down effects from the federal government decisions are you seeing in your state and in your community? And come discuss at the weigh-in on strategies that we could lay out as a collective movement. And then lastly, before we go, again, as the communications director, I would be remiss if I didn't call out just a few more extra things. So number one, signing up for our monthly newsletter, and you can do that by going to bit.ly/AWHA newsletter. You can also just go to awayhomeamerica.org/newsletter and sign up for that. You can also sign up for our State of the Movement in-person event, which this year will be held in Chicago, Illinois on October 22nd and 23rd. Registration is completely free, so come gather with us as we continue to move conversations just like these that we've had today towards collective action. And then finally, you can sign up to receive future future advocacy alerts, and check out the New Deal website to learn more about the New Deal to end youth homelessness and our policy recommendations. If you'd like to engage in our monthly Policy Squad meetings, you can also email Josh directly at josh@awayhomeamerica.org. And so we also just have a few other links if you want to peruse these as you're exiting. But just want to say thank you again for attending this year's Trash and Treasure Part 1 across all levels. And we look forward to seeing all of you on Tuesday for the community weigh in. And I hope that you all have an amazing, amazing day and an amazing rest of your week.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.
Mm.